Hey everyone, my name is Owen, and along with my partner Aradia, it is our job to make sure, by the end of this presentation, you are all experts on historical globalization, contemporary globalization, and the 3 rounds of globalization.
3 rounds? I thought globalization was just beginning. I mean, I know that the markets are becoming more and more global, and that technology is advancing faster than it ever was. But all of these global advancements just began in the last century. There's no possible way that there's 3 rounds of globalization. Come on, man.
Ha! I know it's hard to believe, but signs of the world globalizing could be seen as early as 2,500 years ago, or around 400 BC.
Oh wow, I never would have thought. Globalization was seen that early?
That's exactly it. But I can't just stay here educating you. You're supposed to be just as a part of this presentation as I am. We have to educate the people.
Haha, you're right. Why don't you go ahead and start talking about the very first round of globalization, while I try to get my facts straight.
No problem. Well, the first round of globalization began around 400 BC. Before the modern-day globalization of trade in goods and services, globalization consisted of the exchange of ideas across distinct civilizations, which helped form worldviews of citizens. In the early rounds, most of these ideas originated in places like India, Greece, and Rome. These ancient civilizations undoubtedly cross-fertilized their secrets, alongside the vanished memories of even earlier civilizations, such as Egypt and Babylon. An example of this can be found in the writings of Megasthenes, who was a Greek ambassador that traveled to India. He wrote the famous Indica, which served as an important source for many later writers because of its detail on the Himalayas and the island of Sri Lanka. Naturally, the interplay between territory and distinct cultures is a part of globalization. The interactions between different nations today that is considered to be globalization was not all that different of a concept than what was seen back then. Leaving out the tools of media and technology today, the goals of the ancient civilizations were very similar to those of the different civilizations now. Some of the very first ambassadors of globalization were the people of Arabia. Reading the works of Islamic scholar al-Biruni, we can find that it was in fact the Arabs who transferred Indian science, medicine, literature, and above all, mathematics to Western Europe. Although globalization this early on wasn't nearly as prominent as it has become today, it still showed early signs and promise of what the world was inevitably going to become.
Wow, that's a lot of information.
Well, a lot of information was being spread throughout the world at that time. Why don't you begin to summarize what the second round of globalization was about?
Sure thing, Owen. The second round of globalization evolved from the first, and began in the late 1400s. At this time, Europe was trying to become a powerful globalizing force, through the production of valuable goods, as well as the invention of new technologies. The enhancement of ships and other transporting vessels served as a harbinger to the age of exploration. Goods and ideologies could be traded and spread farther distances, and with greater influence. One example is Christopher Columbus's voyages. This will be touched on in one of my fellow classmates' presentations, but his voyages explored unknown lands and gained influence for Europe, promoting imperialism. Imperialism is the expansion of a country's power and influence through force or the absorption of ideologies. While Europe began its rise to being a worldwide superpower, India and China lost influence. Europe began trading goods and empowering other nations, so the Chinese and Indian ideologies became less important and valued. Between 1750 and 1850, Europe began to go through a phase called the Industrial Revolution. Production speed was increased greatly, with new inventions like the steam engine and the mechanical spinning wheel. Europe became a leading industrial power, supplying the world with many resources and materials, including 2/3 of its coal, half its iron, and half its cotton cloth. When we neared the time of World War II, China and India had very minimal global power, while Europe was a global superpower. But the combination of Europe's industrial strength in the second round of globalization, as well as China and India's ideologies, spread in the first round, created a homogenized global culture.
And here I was thinking that you didn't know your stuff.
Haha, I was just joking around then, but I believe that now it's your turn to explain the third and final round of globalization.
Of course. The third round of globalization can be described as the modern age of globalization. Almost everything is now becoming borderless, including finance, politics, and even identity. Investors seek the highest rate of return, and do this ever more easily in a borderless world. While industry seeks low wages, market growth is always potentially higher in places with lower standards of living and larger economic gaps to bridge.
Created using Powtoon.